Welcome to Prediction Market Movers. My name is Chris Gerlacher. I'm the senior political reporter for Prediction News, and we've got Jeremiah Johnson here with us from the Center for New Liberalism. We're going to talk about a little bit about prediction markets, and we're going to get right into the New York mayor race, the two gubernatorial races, and start looking ahead at what politics and both parties' bases are beginning to look like. So, like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Prediction News, and follow us on X at Prediction News. Jeremiah, I want to start with prediction markets. How did they first end up on your radar? How did you come to them?
I have been in gambling world for a while since I was in college. I was in college kind of during the first big poker boom, which was, Chris Moneymaker winning the World Series of Poker and online poker's first kind of big renaissance. And so I was, playing poker during those years, and the games were amazing. The games were so unbelievably soft and fishy that you didn't actually have to be that good to make money at it. And then from there, I kind of branched out into sports betting, and I was a positive sports bettor for a while. I focused on like niche stuff that I thought I had an edge in. It's very difficult to actually beat the sports book on like playing the NFL or playing the NBA. But I focused on like combat sports and like Olympic sports and just places where I didn't think the lines were actually all that good. I don't think the books cared about having very good lines. You've always got to have some kind of meta strategy for why am I able to beat the sports book? Why do I actually know more than anyone else? And that was my strategy, was to focus on more neglected sports. And so that's always been something that I've been interested in. And I think from there, just hanging around with that kind of person who's very analytical and very like, into reading about economic theory and applying that to things like, sports and poker and other gambling related topics was kind of my initial introduction into when people started to talk about prediction markets. It made a lot of sense to me. The idea just, clicked.
Sure. Were you one of the early predicted traders?
I was on Predicted, but I'd never put a ton of money down because it was a weird, frustrating system to use. I'm sure you're aware, but there was a lot of fees and limits, and just it was a very odd system, especially near the beginning.
Yeah, they really tamped down to make it that small scale academic CFTC friendly platform. Although their relaunch is coming soon, hopefully after the government shutdown. So we'll see how they change it as they commercialize a little bit more.
Yep. And it's funny the way that like the two worlds have collided now, in that when you say prediction markets now, what you really mean is sports betting. Because, like the volume that Call Sheet or Polymarket have on sports these days.
Oh, the 80-90% volume any week on sports.
Yeah, it's all, the volume of like, it's funny, people talk about, and I'm sympathetic to this, but people talk about the high-minded ideals of like prediction markets can provide useful information to society. And most of that useful information comes in the terms of like the spread on the Jets game. But so, call it a partial win.
Sure. I think a lot of those folks are going to end up being disappointed when they find out how few people really want to get to ground truth. So my thoughts and prayers to crypto.com, over the next few years. But
well, like Robinhood wants to get into selling. Like they have some name for them, but like sports futures or something. Like and like pretend like it's a stock or something. But yeah, I mean, everything is gambling these days. And even as somebody who has a long history with gambling, I'm a little uneasy with how much everything is gambling these days. I saw an app recently that lets you basically bet on whether or not you have to pay individual credit card charges.
Oh, well, that's odd.
Yeah, basically like, there was an ad that was like, you bought this OnlyFans models page for $14. Spin the roulette wheel, double down, double or nothing to see if you have to pay it or not. And I was like, that seems like the kind of like, I don't know about that.
That's I can smell the backlash coming.
I feel like Sharia law now.
Oh boy. Well, what do prediction markets offer that polls may lack, or and where are they? What gaps are they filling in for each other?
It's interesting because I think political prediction markets are very useful,
Mm-hmm.
but they still do have some gaps. So I think the first instance of this, which is not really a prediction market, it doesn't work in the same way, but the first kind of useful addition to the polls we got started around 2008, and this was Nate Silver kind of inventing the poll aggregation science field, and now there's a lot of Nate Silvers. Nate Silver is still doing this, but now there's a bunch of people who are all kind of trying to emulate that and do the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the central insight was that, you can look at one poll, but looking at all the polls together is better.
Mm-hmm.
And you can listen to commentary. You can listen to, Maureen Dowd take a trip to Iowa and talk to some people in diners and be like, based on my diner experience, I think that Mitt Romney's got a long way to go. But there's just a more scientific way to handle these things, right? You can look at the past, you can extrapolate. And so Nate Silver Nate Silver deserves a lot of credit for kind of modernizing and the way that we think about elections, really putting a predictive, scientific kind of sheen on things. And I think that prediction markets are one of the next steps in that. Nate Silver's method involves being kind of a centralized aggregation of data and doing a lot of statistical techniques, whereas prediction markets are more pure in the sense that they are just, what do people think? Do we believe in the wisdom of the crowds or not? Now, do they actually perform better than kind of the expert aggregators is an open question, because in recent elections, they have not necessarily. I haven't actually looked at an analysis for 2024, but I know that if you look at 2020 and 2022, it's very, very close. They perform about the same. And I think the aggregators were maybe a little bit ahead. But so, it's another tool, I think, and that lets us get away. I think the important thing is to get away from the punditry of just, I talked to a man on the street and here's what I think.
Right.
And that's important. I also think that prediction markets allow us to do this for more state and local races, places where 538 or any of the other aggregators are not going to really pay as much attention. They're not going to devote their time to building a full model of the New York City mayor's race. And if they do New York, they're certainly not going to do the Denver mayor's race or whatever the case may be. But with prediction markets, there's no reason that you can't. And so they can potentially fill a gap there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think one of the most interesting things to me about the prediction markets was they showed some small edge that Trump had. I mean, a 60-40 split is it's not far off from a coin toss, but there's been a big distrust in polling, especially from the last 3 presidential cycles, where Trump has been consistently underestimated. I mean, even when even when polls correctly called Joe Biden's victory in 2020, it was often by the actual margin of victory was much closer than the polls had predicted. I mean, how much do you think that prediction markets are going to be a big vehicle for trust, or do you think the kind of almost theology around prediction markets is going to become a little bit much in that regard?
I think they're valuable. I think they're a tool in the toolbox for understanding the world, right? And no single tool is going to get you all of the way there, is going to have a perfect predictive record, right? But one of the things I'll criticize prediction markets for is their behavior after Trump lost the 2020 election. The votes come in, it becomes very clear that Joe Biden has won the election, and prediction markets, for some reason, still assign Trump an 8 to 9% chance of becoming president, deep into November, into December. And it just doesn't go away. And there is an aspect here of, the markets can remain insolvent. The markets can remain wrong longer than you can remain solvent. People are just not rational sometimes. Markets depend on the idea that good money chases out bad. but we've seen that sometimes there's a lot of bad money. And you can even make an analogy here to things like GameStop, right? Like, there was no reason ever that GameStop's stock should have been above 300 points or whatever ridiculous number it reached. And it's still too high today. But the only reason it is that a lot of people want to own GameStop for weird internet cultural reasons.
Right.
And so there's this giant demand for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's not enough short sellers in the world to kind of drive it back down to where its actual fundamental value is, well, you're just going to have this weird situation where GameStop is worth as much as is briefly worth as much as Amazon or whatever. Now, is that an accurate picture of the world? No, but it is the price that existed for a little while. And the same thing can happen with prediction markets. They're very useful. They did provide signs that Trump was being underestimated in the polls for sure. But they also have errors in the other direction where, they can remain weirdly stuck on the idea that, like, maybe Donald Trump did win this election, like, even after all the votes were counted.
And all the lawsuits were settled. I think the only one he won was the Pennsylvania one over late mail-in ballots that were going to get thrown out anyway. So that was a lot. And it's those kinds of, small oddities, the demand for contracts that were overpriced for Trump in some of those markets that, they make me wonder how the Trump family partnerships with prediction markets are going to go. Sure, some people get wealthy off of partnering with them, but some of the things that they touch also die. So, I'm waiting to see what happens when Kalshire Polymarket has to call a Democratic victory in 28 or, 2032 or, whenever the next Democratic victory is. Because the election denial movement hasn't gone away either.
Well, and part of this, I think, is that prediction markets are still in their very early days. They still have, for the most part, fairly thin markets that are not truly deep and liquid markets in the way that we understand, like, the market for large cap stocks or the market for treasuries or currency markets are really deep and really liquid. And so we really trust them to be correct and to be kind of responsive in the way that we want markets to be. Prediction markets are not there yet. There's still instances where you can make pure arbitrage profit from one market to the next. There's plenty of those. If you want to, just if you're diligent about checking markets, you can find arbitrage opportunities. I remember in the election, there were certain arbitrages over, like, the odds for who would win the presidency and then the odds of individual states. If you did the math, they didn't really line up perfectly. And you could make money just by, betting away the differences between them. So all of this is to say that, they're a tool that's useful, but they're definitely not perfect and they're definitely not mature yet.
Well, let me ask you about one of the very deep and liquid markets on Kalshi right now and on Polymarket as well, and that's the New York City mayoral race. Mamdani looks like he's, coasting to victory. There was a small dip in odds, but he's still like 88%, likely to win, and he's comfortably ahead in the polls. You've been tweeting about this a little bit in recent days. What are people outside of New York City missing about the New York City mayoral race?
Yeah, everybody has a hot take on this race. And it's one of those things where it really says more about you, what your hot take is, than it does about the race. Like, everybody wants to put their own pet issue on this. So, if you're coming from the left, like, this is a sign that socialism is going to be ascendant in America. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that what happens in New York, and look, I'm in New York, but I don't think that what happens here has any bearing on, like, who's going to win Iowa in the 2028 presidential election.
Doesn't decide how Dallas is going to go.
Yeah, exactly. This is, and it never has. When was the last time the New York City mayor had an impact on the national election? Bloomberg tried to run for president and failed hilariously. Giuliani tried to run for president and failed hilariously. Bill de Blasio tried to run for president and failed hilariously. People thought Eric Adams was going to be the next thing in national politics when he got elected, and he ended up just being a deeply, deeply weird person who took bribes from the Turkish consulate of all things. New York City local politics do not influence the nation. But people, they're going to give their hot takes because they want to say what they were already looking for an excuse to say. On the other side, there's people who are saying like, this is going to end up with somehow the dark reign of wokeness and Islamic Sharia law at the same time. I'm not
those
sure
two
how they
don't
get
go
there.
together.
Yeah, it's woke Sharia. But no, it's very weird to hear someone call Mamdani an Islamist just because he's like a brown guy. Because like he's like, look, I know the social circles that he's hung out in. He is almost assuredly an atheist. Like that's everybody in this Brooklyn DSA sphere is non-religious.
Yeah.
So
Not a lot of religiosity among the anti-institutionalist, skeptical crowd.
So I have no fear that he's going to turn into some sort of, Islamic Republic of New York. But that's something you see people repeating on the right. Mostly nobody can be normal about this election. And it's just like, I think the thing that most people miss, some people want to, certainly there's other things you can analyze. There's, the focus on Cuomo's past scandals. There's the focus, Mamdani's social media and his comms strategy, which has been excellent. He's got a very strong comms team. He's got a very strong social media game. There's the focus on cost of living, which he's, for the most part, I would say he's been very disciplined and sticking to just the message about the cost of living. But I think the thing that people who are outside of New York don't get about this race is how much people in New York can just smell a phony, and that Andrew Cuomo is absolutely a phony when it comes to being anything about New York City. Like the thing about Mamdani, whether you like him or you don't, and I'm not a democratic socialist. I'm not inclined towards, sympathy towards that wing of the party. But Zohran Mamdani very obviously is like a New York guy. He loves being in New York. You can tell he loves the city. You can tell he's like lives and breathes the city. And Andrew Cuomo doesn't give a shit about New York. And it's just so obvious from everything he says and does. Like Andrew Cuomo didn't live in New York City until like late 2024. He moved here like less than a year before the election, I think. And he spent the last 30 to 35 years living, in between Albany and Westchester in upstate. And it's just like, you can tell he doesn't know New York. He doesn't understand New York. He doesn't give much of a crap about it, other than he wants to make a political comeback, and this is apparently the way he chose to do it. I think that's the big thing in this election, is that people can tell that Cuomo is just a fake. He's not running for any particular reason other than like, I'm famous and you should vote for me. And he's not from New York City. Like he's just not.
Yeah, that well, one of the takes I've been seeing is, this is a fight within the Democratic Party between the establishment and the anti-establishment wings. And sure, but it's not like that's a new conflict. We can go back to 2016 and, talk about that with Sanders and Clinton as well.
Well, and the thing about that is that like the establishment would not have chosen Cuomo. They did not choose him. He forced himself into the race. If you had asked like the establishment of the New York Democratic Party, they would have told him to go away forever. But he ran anyway. And because his name recognition is so high, he was always going to get a certain number of votes. His floor was probably 20 to 25%. And because of that, he basically crowded out every other moderate or establishment candidate. I think there are candidates in this race who definitely could have beaten Zohran Mamdani one-on-one, but they never got the chance to do it because Cuomo forced his way in the race. By name recognition alone, he just seized the moderate lane and prevented someone like a Brad Lander from being able to kind of get any significant momentum.
So what makes an establishment candidate potentially viable against somebody like Mamdani, who can channel populist frustration, who can challenge these big establishment Democrats seemingly quite, not effortlessly, he's put an enormous amount of work in, but he just does not seem touchable. What makes an establishment figure able to compete with somebody like that?
I mean, I think just anything other than Cuomo could have reasonably been a win. Cuomo is just genuinely one of the worst candidates that
Good
you
news
could
for
imagine.
Democrats across the country.
It is like what people remember him for most in New York is two things. Number one, the sexual harassment scandals, where like a dozen plus women all said that he sexually harassed them, and he had to resign in disgrace. And then number two, during COVID, he killed a bunch of people's grandparents by keeping what's the
nursing homes?
The nursing homes, by basically like allowing COVID into the nursing homes and forcing people to stay in them, and like basically directly killed a bunch of people. And so like Curtis Sliwa, who's the Republican in this race, who's funny and amazing, and who I'm not voting for, but I hope just sticks around as a New York character forever. Curtis Sliwa had this great line on cable news, like he's, smacking fannies and killing grannies. And like, how do you come back from that? That's the two things Andrew Cuomo is known for. And he's 67 years old, and he's always been kind of an asshole. Like everybody in New York politics knows that Cuomo is a disagreeable asshole, but like he had a political machine behind him. So like he used to win the governorship anyway. But like he has no allies. Nobody wants to be behind him. Nobody wants to stick their neck out for him. Anybody other than Cuomo could have put up a better showing. It was one of the worst things that could have happened to kind of the moderate wing of the Democratic Party that he decided to run.
And what makes Brad Lander a possible competitor in another universe?
Well, Lander, it's funny. He's not even really like, I wouldn't call him so much a moderate. He's more of a synthesis. He's not a democratic socialist, but he does call himself a progressive. He's kind of in the middle of the New York Democratic Party. He appeals to a lot of people. He can appeal to the progressive wing. He can appeal to the moderate wing. He appeals to kind of the technocratic wing because he's very like pro-housing, and he's kind of a smart reformer as well. So he would be well positioned to pick up a lot of different lanes at once, I think. And you have to remember, like, Mamdani did not come into this race crushing it. He did not come into this race with big recognition and like everybody knew who he was. He came into this race, he was at 1% to 2%. And he just kind of gradually grew and grew and grew. And a lot of that is because he has a great comm strategy. He had a great messaging strategy. And so like credit to him. But if there was already a synthesis character, a synthesis candidate like Lander, who is getting 30 to 35%, which in a world without Cuomo definitely could have happened. Somebody would have jumped out to the lead. And I think Lander's one of the main, candidates who could have done that. In that world, I'm not sure that Mamdani ever reaches as high as he does. I think that Mamdani really benefited from running against Cuomo. That Cuomo was that guy who started out with 25 to 30% in a crowded field. And so now you've just got, because he's so personally noxious, whoever can be the most convincingly anti-establishment is the best foil against Cuomo.
What are your expectations for how Mamdani actually performs as a mayor when he gets into office?
I think the thing I try to repeat to people here is that the error bars on this are really, really wide. There's really wide variance in terms of what could happen, and more so than a normal mayor. Like when Eric Adams got elected, you pretty much knew how certain things were going to go. You knew what his relationship with the police was going to be like. You knew how he was going to run City Hall to some degree. And I don't think you could have predicted like the weird bribery stuff or just all the various weird things that Eric Adams does. But there's a certain degree of predictability to most people that I think is not necessarily there with Mamdani because his track record is so short. He's been a state legislator for 3 to 4 years, and that's the entirety of his political history pretty much. Before that, he was trying to be a SoundCloud rapper. So, he hasn't authored like a great number of bills in that time. He's been an okay legislator in terms of like productivity, but not like an outstanding one. So it's really just kind of up in the air. Like, what is he going to do? Is he actually going to try to go hard left? That's a possibility. Is he going to try to kind of move to the center? He's already trying there's certain ways in which, he's making very conciliatory noises on the police. For instance, he wants to keep Jessica Tisch. He wants to keep her on as police commissioner. So he's like not wanting to make waves there. And, he's giving contradictory signals, for instance, about like the need to build more housing. He says a lot of good stuff on housing, but then he does not endorse like certain rezonings or he has not yet endorsed the ballot measures that would help build more housing. So there's just like, it's very unclear to me. And I think he could end up being a lot of things. He could end up being a pretty decent mayor. He could end up being a catastrophically bad mayor. He could be generically bad in the way that a lot of New York mayors are. I think which is the boring take is probably the most likely one, which is that he will be kind of a generically bad mayor in the way that a lot of mayors are generically bad.
And how do you think Democrats and Republicans are going to take Mamdani's likely victory and then misread it for what it means for the 2026 midterms?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to happen everywhere, but the left wing of the Democratic Party will absolutely take this as a sign that, like, look, we need to run on economic populism, leftism. We need to just be, as long as you are a true progressive and a true, believer in left-wing ideas, then everyone will agree with you. And that seems to me to be a very silly point of view, because the country is not New York City. This is a very blue city. This has no bearing on what will happen elsewhere.
You're already seeing Republican candidates in Virginia and New Jersey trying to hang Mamdani around the necks of their Democratic opponents. How effective is that going to be? And is that going to be a useful strategy in some races and not others?
I suspect it's probably not going to be that useful. I mean, I'm not an expert on like Virginia politics. I don't live there. I don't know much about Abigail Spanberger or the nature of their race. But I do know that this kind of thing always exists, right? Like if it wasn't Mamdani, it would be AOC, or it would be Bernie Sanders, or, 10 years ago, it was Nancy Pelosi. There's always some boogeyman. And it doesn't stop Democrats from winning races. And there's a similar dynamic on the right where the left wing will point out the people to the furthest right and try to make sure that everyone in the party is associated with this crazy person, with Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever the case may be. And we can have a big fight about, is the Republican Party more like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or is the Democratic Party more like AOC? But clearly those tactics don't stop people from winning elections.
Right. So it's just kind of noise, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
And I know the country is not New York City. It's not really New Jersey either, but New Jersey and Virginia, their gubernatorial races, that seems like a better early testing ground for 2026 messaging. What do you think the implications of those races and those possible Democratic victories are for the midterms, if any?
Yeah, I think that Virginia especially, it's not quite a swing seat anymore. It's one of those reach states where it's kind of a blue state now, but in a big year, you could imagine a Republican winning it. New Jersey, honestly, similarly might be in a similar place where if there was a Republican wave year in a presidential election, you could imagine a Republican eking it out by 1 or 2 points. It's not so far gone that would be impossible. And they do have competitive statewide races sometimes. Obviously, the GOP has won a governor's race here in Virginia recently. So I think that is a better kind of bellwether for the direction the country might be headed in. I think especially you look at performance relative to expectations. I think people expect Spanberger to win in Virginia, for instance. But does she win by 1 to 2 points? Does she win by 15 points? I think that will tell us a lot about the nature of where the electorate is right now and what a generic congressional ballot might look like. That kind of underperformance, overperformance in state and local races has a history, I think, of being reasonably predictive of what's coming next.
And what gaps do you think are in the electorate that, they're hoping an elected official will respond to? I know it's early in Trump's second term, but what unmet need do you think is out there right now waiting for a politician who can really harness it?
This is just my pet theory. I have no idea whether it's correct or not, but I'll throw it out there, and the listeners can take it for what it's worth. I think that the Democratic Party especially should be going harder on trade. I think that, number one, Donald Trump's tariffs are extremely stupid, and they're stupid in theory. They're extremely stupid in practice. We have a president who is literally tariffing countries because his feelings got hurt, because he saw an advertisement that he didn't like in Canada. And so now they get an extra 10% tariffs because they hurt my feelings. It's a little child running up to mommy and wailing about their feelings. And so it's ridiculous policy. And the public, by and large, agrees with me. This is right now something like a 70-30 issue where the public thinks that the tariffs are ridiculous. And this includes the large majority of independents. It also includes a substantial amount of Republicans. And I think that number is going to get worse over time because the tariffs are wrecking things. They're killing businesses. They're actually killing manufacturing as well. The one thing that they're supposed to be helping, they're decimating American manufacturing. Something like half of all inputs, or let me make sure I say this correctly. Half of the imports, half of the things that we import into this country are inputs that we use in manufacturing. They're inputs that we use to make other things.
That high.
So when you put these massive amounts of tariffs on countries, countries, there's a 10% like global baseline now, but some countries have 30, 40, 50, 70, 80% tariffs coming. It absolutely destroys our ability to make anything in this country because we import raw materials, we import parts, we import the machines that help us make things. It is a global interconnected economy. There's no possible way that we can just make every single thing that we need right here. Nobody in the world does that except for North Korea. And they have a whole ideology called Juche, which is you can see how it's working out. So my pet theory is that, number one, tariffs are stupid. Number two, they're unpopular. And number three, it's going to get worse over time. And that in a year to 2 years' time, the case for free trade will just be so overwhelming and blindingly obvious that Democrats will really do themselves a lot of favors if they go hard in the free trade direction right now. And it's hard for them to do this because they have traditional constituencies that are very skeptical of free trade. There's, the left wing of the party, which is just anti-capitalism in general, doesn't want to hear about this. And the unions are typically very skeptical of trade. But Democrats are losing unions anyway. The unions are already gone to some extent. Blue collar white men who work in union manual labor jobs, that's a Trump constituency now anyway. They've already left. Right. So, why are you clinging to this thing why are you clinging to the wrong side of a 70-30 issue?
Sure. And how else is the Democratic Party changing in the wake of Harris's loss and this search for a new party figurehead?
Yeah, there's a lot of soul searching right now among Democrats. And this is what happens in a healthy party. I think it's a sign of a healthy political process that when you lose a big election, you go through some soul searching, right? You have a little bit of fighting within the party about who was responsible. Each wing wants to blame the other wing. And that's the nature of how these things go. I think it's a much more unhealthy sign what you saw in 2020 when the Republican Party lost and their reaction was, we didn't actually lose. This was a fraud and a fake. and everything's, that to me is a very unhealthy reaction to losing in a democratic system. But so there's a lot of people trying to reinvent the party. The left wing of the party wants them to become more left wing, more populist. The more centrist wing of the party wants them to, move to the center a bit, to focus more on ideas like abundance and YIMBYism and things like that. That happens to be the wing of the party that I'm aligned with. And I'm part of that process in trying to get Democrats to embrace ideas that I think are good, move to the center, meet voters where they are. I don't think you can really win by lecturing voters about what they should care about. You have to take what they do care about and adapt to it. And so that process happens. There's no central figurehead right now to lead it because we did lose the election. But, come 2028, come the primaries, there will be a central figure again, and Democrats will have to kind of unite around a new set of ideas.
Sure. Any early obvious candidates besides really Gavin Newsom and AOC?
Gavin Newsom is, I think, the front runner right now, but in the sense that I would give him like 20% chance, which is more than I'd give anyone else.
Right.
I think it's a very fractured field right now. Newsom is going to be in the race, and he's positioning himself as kind of like the all lanes candidate, the everyman candidate, where he can, he's a little bit progressive, but he's not all the way. He's a little bit technocratic, but not all the way. He's one of the guys who's just fighting Trump. Like a lot of what the Democratic base wants to see is just anyone who fights. And so he's developed this social media strategy of, I'm just going to scream at Trump in all caps the way that he does with other people. And I don't know, people seem to like it. But I'm not convinced that AOC will run. I think she certainly could run, but I think it's just as likely that she ends up running for Senate, that she ends up basically trying to take Chuck Schumer's seat. That's a thing that could happen. If she does run for president, I would sell, that pretty hard. I do not think that I would give her much of a chance. She would be the most left-wing candidate. She would attract all the left-wing support. But I simply don't think I don't think that's going to win in a primary, not with the mood of the country the way it is. When you've lost an election, when you've lost 2 out of the last 3 elections, people are going to want someone who can win. I think one of the things that the Democratic base will be looking for is just who can actually win this election, not who has the highest purity of ideas, but who can actually win? Who can we be certain will win? I think that voters will put a lot of stock into that. And you'll see candidates like, I don't know exactly who among this crowd will run, but Andy Beshear from Kentucky, Pete Buttigieg. There's going to be maybe Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. There's going to be governors. There's going to be people kind of trying to take that lane of like, I am the pragmatic candidate who has good ideas, but who can also just appeal to enough people to beat Donald Trump. So, that'll be a very contested lane, I think.
I think so. And I think a lot of listeners are going to look at the 2028 race and they're going to compare it back to 2016 and say, hey, we've got this, this establishment, anti-establishment fight. And, is the energy, I guess, going to be with the populist in 2028, or is there going to be an appetite for kind of centrist, democratic, normal, almost Joe Biden-esque, the way there was in 2020?
Well, and that's where the majority of the party is, right? Like, you can say that Bernie Sanders had the most energy in both 2016 and 2020, but he didn't have the most votes. And this is remember, this is just among the Democratic primary electorate. So it's already just Democrats, and it's already just Democrats who show up to vote in primaries, which is not most of them. This is like an ideologically self-selected group of people. Even among that very narrow crowd, Sanders wasn't able to get the most votes. Hillary Clinton beat him, even though he put up a very impressive performance for a guy calling himself a socialist in 2016. He kind of changed the definition of how far you could go, right? With that sort of belief system. And then in 2020, he was in front for a little while, But once all the centrist candidates kind of consolidated, once Klobuchar and Buttigieg and Beto and whoever else, there's a couple other ones. Once they all dropped out, everybody kind of consolidated behind Joe Biden, who then very easily beat Bernie in the vast majority of contests. I think he went, didn't he? I think he won almost every state on Super Tuesday. Like he went 13 for 13 or something. So, that is where the majority of the party is. There's always a lot of energy on the left wing. There's always a lot of social media energy, a lot of people, very well-attended rallies. But with the actual voting public, the majority of them want a more moderate, general Democrat candidate who they think can win the election.
Sure. And as we get further and further into Trump's second term, how do you think, what are the kind of two paths his presidency could take that could, make a more centrist Democrat more likely versus a more left-wing populist candidate more likely in 28?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that there really are different paths for Trump at this point. I think he's pretty committed to just one path, which is, and look, I'm a partisan, so if anybody wants to take what I say with a grain of salt, that's fine. But he's increasingly authoritarian, increasingly centralizing power in his personal hands. Congress is a broken institution, and even though Republicans control Congress, they are more than happy to just cede all of the power to him. Tariffs are just a great example of this. Congress, by constitutional writ, has control over tariff policy, but congressional Republicans are more than happy to just have him do whatever he wants. He's going after his political enemies. It seems like a really genuinely dangerous time for democracy to me. And the thing is, he seems pretty committed to that. I don't think there's a second path. There's no longer an off ramp. This is just where we are. And I really hope that Democrats can win one of these two elections. That's who I am, and that's what I care about. But
sure. And then will his increasing embrace of authoritarianism, is that going to make a kind of centrist state builder more likely, do you think, in 2028? Because it's going to be hard if he breaks everything to, run a candidate that also wants to break everything.
It's hard because I think that what the Democratic base really wants to see, like I said earlier, is just fight. They want to see resistance. They want to see somebody getting angry and doing something. And it's very hard for Democrats to do that right now because they don't have any of the levers of power. That's why the shutdown is going on as long as it is because it's one thing the Democrats can do. They can pick an issue, which they picked, the Obamacare subsidies, and they can just take a stand and say, we're not giving in on this. And so the base really, really wants somebody to fight, but that is not always the same thing as being, far left wing. There's this odd dynamic sometimes where, people on like left-wing social media will almost find ways to excuse like, oh, well, the Trump movement is just reacting to material conditions of the blah, 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 blah. Whereas you go talk to like you go to the No Kings protest and you talk to some very, normal looking wine mom, some 55-year-old lady who's just a nice suburban soccer mom. And she's saying like, we have to spill the blood of traitors all over the world. Like she is like unbelievably like kill the bastards. And yet, she's going to end up voting for Gavin Newsom or Pete Buttigieg. Like she would not be a left-wing voter, but her anger is still like white hot fury. Like that's an interesting dynamic, I think, where the degree of anger is not necessarily an ideological thing. And so part of it is just how angry is the candidate going to be? How much are they also going to want to hurt their enemies to some extent?
And where is Trump's base going to go after he's out of power? Because, I mean, some of them are loyal Republicans, but some of them are that populist base that's happy to switch parties every generation.
Yeah, it's an open question, right? What happens to Trumpism after Trump? And there's a couple points of evidence. We don't really know what's going to happen, but we can look at, for instance, the midterms. The midterms have gone very badly for Trump both times that, and I say both times, but the 2018 midterms were a disaster for Trump, gigantic backlash. The 2022 midterms, when again, Trump was not president, but he was still the central political figure in the country, him and Joe Biden, they were going to have a rematch, right? We all knew that Trump was going to run again. And Joe Biden, despite being, a Democratic presidency, there really was no backlash in 2022. The Republicans took back the House, but by like a very small margin. There was a predicted red wave that never really materialized. There was a red trickle. And so what I think we see is that the Trump movement underperforms in the polls when Trump is not on the ballot during these midterms. It also really helps Democrats that they are now the educated party. They are the party of high engagement, high socioeconomic status voters. And so they tend to do much better during the midterms. This is counter to traditional Democratic wisdom, right? Like Democrats have always been like, if we just turn out our voters, if we just increase turnout, we're going to win.
Yeah.
Because they thought they did well with kind of those marginal voters, those voters that don't always show up. And that's completely reversed. The marginal voter is now more of a Trump fan. They have less education, lower socioeconomic status, and they're more likely to vote for Trump. In these elections, when not as many people vote, off-year elections, midterm elections, Democrats tend to clean up. Democrats have a big advantage there. The other thing that I think we'll see, other than kind of this midterm data point, is we'll probably see J.D. Vance running in 2028. Seems like the most likely thing. And I think everybody on Team Trump, everybody in the coalition sticks with Vance. He's very deliberately trying to play all sides. He's trying to play the role of peacemaker and kind of the guy who goes between the factions and who relates to all the factions so that he can keep this together. And if he wins, it'll be good. Everybody will stay happy. Winning covers up all sorts of sins, right? You can forgive any number of sins as long as you win. But if he doesn't win, I suspect that coalition will fracture fast, that there will be vicious recriminations and infighting, and that the different wings of the Republican Party, such as they exist now, will kind of collapse. That we may find out, if J.D. Vance loses, that Trump was the only thing keeping these very weird groups together.
What is it that makes that coalition strange for people who don't know the intricacies of how the Republican Party is split right now? Because MAGA world is not a monolith.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I'm going to be describing these in the terms that I do because I'm a liberal Democrat. Yeah. But there's the outright white nationalist wing of the party, the Nick Fuentes Groyper wing, which is an actual wing. That is a constituency that J.D. Vance has to play to. When J.D. Vance does things like, the Republican group chat comes out and it's filled with people saying, I am a Nazi, Heil Hitler, ha ha ha. And J.D. Vance is like, well, they're, just a bunch of young boys. And
that's the Groypers he needs to potentially.
They were in their 30s, by the way. Some of them were elected representatives in their 30s, but, just a bunch of kids. Yeah. But that he's doing that for a strategic reason. Yeah, that he wants to send a signal to the actual Groyper wing of the party, which is not the majority of Republicans, but it's a solid 15% or something. Like, he's sending a signal there. There's kind of the economic nationalists. There's the people who actually give a shit about the tariffs. Your Orrin Casses, your Josh Hawleys, your people who kind of want to do institutional economic planning. This is like Peronism from the right, basically. There's that wing of the party. There's kind of the Christian nationalist wing of the party that wants to remake America as a more explicitly Christian country.
Mike Johnson.
Yeah. So, and the funny thing is that what you haven't heard me say is the like traditional Reagan idea of like, oh, there's a bunch of economic conservatives who believe in free markets. Because a lot of those people have left. Like, there's still some of them, but like the thing Donald Trump got mad at with Canada was that Canada was playing Ronald Reagan speeches in their commercials talking about the value of free trade. And this was just a deep stab in the back that Trump believed required him to retaliate. Like Reaganism is kind of dead in the Republican Party. So they've got all these wings, and it's not clear to me that like the Christian nationalists and the white nationalists actually have anything to do with each other than Trump is useful to both of them. You know, that the weird monarchist wing that actually doesn't believe in democracy and wants to kind of dismantle our institutions and actually be authoritarian, the Curtis Yarvins of the world. It's not clear to me what they have in common with, you know, some of the other wings. But for now, Trump is the glue that keeps it all together.
It's going to be fascinating to see how that crumbles after, or, you know, how those alliances shift. I mean, they may end up.
Yeah, well, like I said, if JD Vance can win, winning covers up everything. Everybody's happy when you win, when you have power. Power solves a lot of problems. But if they lose, then I think it's a likely possibility that things fall apart.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I love that you came on to explain all this to us. Where can people follow you and find your work?
So I write a blog on Substack called Infinite Scroll. You can find that at www.infinitescroll.us. I also host a podcast called the New Liberal Podcast, which is part of the Center for New Liberalism. So if you like, you know, political takes, if you like to hear a variety of experts, follow me there. If you like to read about the social internet and what's happening online, follow me at Infinite Scroll. And it was a lot of fun to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. We'll have to have you on again as we get into the depths of midterm season once candidate selection's all finally done.
Absolutely.